So last night, I literally was up till 2:30 a.m. just watching stupid YouTube videos. And I had no self-control. I just watched video after video. I found one of those channels that summarizes movies, and I did the equivalent of watching like 15 movies. It's terrifying to me. Someone who I believe to be fairly disciplined in myself could sit there and go against my best interest in that way.
Even with current recommender systems technology, things are already scary in terms of the accuracy of recommendations and the mechanics that enable a lot of addictive behavior with social media and just content consumption. We are moving already into a new chapter where not only recommendations are going to be on steroids, and I call it personalization. It's like a new abstraction, but the content itself will be tailored and in many cases generated on the fly for you.
Ale, welcome back to the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast. It's your second appearance.
I'm so excited to be back.
Yeah, always such a pleasure. I've gotten to know you a lot more since the last time we talked. You've done some pretty fun and impressive stuff since the last time we talked as well. And I'm super...
We cooked together?
Yeah, cooked together quite a bit. A lot of steaks, a lot of pizza. Gonna be more pizza tonight. Maybe I'll try to take some video footage of what that might look like, make some people jealous.
That's the best way I can think of getting compensated for this time.
Yeah, exactly.
Trying your homemade pizzas.
That's how I should pay all the podcast guests for their time, is in food trade-offs. But something that I want to kick things off with is you've been basically all over the world since the last time I saw you. And I'm interested in what that experience has been like, especially because both you and your now fiance are working what most people would consider like more traditional, like 9-to-5 jobs. Can you tell me a little bit how you manage that, or some of the places you've been, those types of things?
I mean, it's been amazing. And when we first met 2 years ago here in Hawaii, that was the beginning of that experiment. We were in LA, both working remotely, having a good time, but suddenly we were like, we can do this from anywhere we want. And that's how we came to Hawaii, initially for 1 month, which turned into 5 months. And that, I think, gave us a spark of inspiration and confidence to realize that, we could do this from anywhere. And that led to 10 countries that same year, the second half of 2021. And then last year, I think we did 8 countries and total over 50 cities. It's been incredible. And a lot of learning besides seeing new places and meeting new people. You learn a lot about yourself, and it pushes you to prioritize in a way that you wouldn't do otherwise on a daily basis. Makes you realize that you don't need that much stuff. We've been almost literally on one suitcase each for the past 2 years. Every time we go back, and we have some of our stuff at my fiance's parents' house, and every time we go back, it's like Christmas because we forgot about half the stuff that we had. I was like, wow, I have this. So it's like but it's been a wonderful experience. It does have some overhead at times, but we kind of figure it out, like at a minimum 3 weeks in one place before you go to the next one. It's pretty doable. And it's been good.
So I have a couple questions. So the first one, sort of two-parter, what was maybe the highlight? I'm sure there were many highlights, but if you could choose one. And then what was the most challenging part?
I think the highlight at a high level is that both my fiance and I experience the most productive and creative times at our jobs doing this, which contrary to many people believe that because you're moving it gets distracting and you cannot, but I believe that for some reason when you're traveling and seeing new places and new faces and new cultures, your brain works differently. Something activates that makes you, I don't know, in my case I feel a little more creative, and I think that has been the highlight. And obviously lots of fun moments and trying new things and new places and cities that I fell in love with. I think one realization is sometimes you cannot explain it, but you connect with certain cities and you cannot fully explain why, but you just feel it. And the more you do it, the more, I don't know, you develop that thing. Like I fell in love with Lisbon. Like it's a city that after 2 days I was like, I can see myself living here for a while. Prague, and other cities like that. But and the challenging, I think it's well, at times not knowing where you're gonna sleep in a in a week. Um, yeah, especially the days that you switch places or switch cities or you have a long flight. Obviously, that can add a little bit of exhaustion at times, and yeah. But for the most part, it's been a good.
I know between the two of you, you're not as much planners necessarily. It's like sort of on a whim sometimes, and I think that like it's interesting because in your work you're very structured and premeditated, but in some of the travel, it's like yeah, like we'll stay another month. Who cares?
I mean, the funny thing is that I think fundamentally we are on the more planner side. We like to have our stuff together and be able to have predictability in most aspects of life. But in this case, somehow we let go. And I mean, I'm being unfair to Lyric, my fiance. She loves to have good predictability and structure and thing. I like to be on the edge at times and have, I like risk. So I guess I convinced her to adopt that a little bit more. But there were times where even I was like, wow, this is kind of crazy. Like times that I did not even plan the basics. So, we didn't know where we would stay in like 2 days instead of 2 weeks. So,
hey, you figured it out. You're here now.
Yeah, and that's also the thing. Like that you figure it out. I mean, if you have an established budget, and especially in Europe, it's easier to find places even last minute that are reasonably priced. In the US, it's becoming more and more challenging.
Especially where, here.
Yeah. But in Europe, you can still find more than decent places for $100 a night. So even if it's last minute, you always find a place. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask you about overall cost of living, but before I do that, I am interested in what you were saying about sort of the creativity and being able to tap into that when you're traveling. I very often think about this idea of explore versus exploit, and really digging in to a specific thing and mastering it and getting to know it well. But for example, in sports and jiu-jitsu and those types of things that I'm really excited about, I find I get so much value out of the explore because that opens up all these connections in the other things that I'm doing. Yeah. And I think travel is probably one of those things where you're exposed to all these different things. And when you're so linearly focused on, let's say, a job or a project, you're only thinking about that. You're not making the connections that you make when you're doing the complete opposite, when you're sort of opening your mind and experiencing a new culture, or you sort of have to, when you experience some of these new cultures, go in with almost like a childlike mindset because it's so different. If you're taking your preconceived notion about living in Argentina or living in the United States into those other places, you're not going to either enjoy it or you're going to piss off the locals or something, you're not going to be able to maximize the experience. So it's cool that you can have crossover between leisure, experience, and work in that unique way.
I totally agree. And I think we talked a little bit about this in the first podcast 2 years ago, like the idea of, exploring more than one field and somehow your brain allows you to connect them and create associations that can be really powerful. So that's for sure. But I think there's another aspect which is, very, personal. Some people operate at their best when they have a lot of predictability. They have their routine, they have their space, and they know what to expect in terms of where they're gonna be. They have the exact setup every single day. And that's for a lot of people. I'm not one of those. I'm an adventurer. I've kept, the inner child in me, and when I'm traveling or seeing different things or seeing something every day that I haven't seen the day before, my well-being in general, I feel a lot better. I feel a lot more connected. And I think that has a lot to do with creativity and showing up to work with a fresh brain, and that that inspires more ideas. So I know it works for me. A lot of people and friends are like, "How do you do this?" and and I don't know. I think I recognize that in myself. For someone like me, that far from compromising my ability to do my job, I think it actually inspires me to be more creative and productive.
Yeah, I want to maybe refine that a little bit, because I think I'm one of those people where I have structure, I really thrive, but I also need that exploration as well. And I just structure my exploration. And I think that everyone, maybe that's a slightly too much generalization, but almost everyone could benefit from having at least a little bit of the explore. It doesn't necessarily have to be cultural exploration. It could be, trying different coding libraries. It could be just watching YouTube videos.
A sport. Or I totally agree. And I think, a lot of people that we know, like some people are like, oh, this is amazing what you guys are doing. I wish I could do this. And knowing that there are people that are in the exact same position, they could do it. I think there's a lot of paralysis also, that uncertainty of, oh, what I'm going to do with my stuff and stuff. But like you say, you don't even need to travel to another country. Like, it can be anything that puts your mind and body in a different setting, in a different frequency. And I think that's, I would say it's universally beneficial to everyone. Yeah.
We'll get you in the ice bath tonight. It'll get you definitely out of your,
all right.
In a different mental spot.
This episode of Cat Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP. HP's high compute, workstation-grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high-performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z8 workstation. I really love that the Z workstations can come standard with Linux or WSL2, and they can be configured with the Data Science Software Stack Manager. With the Software Stack Manager, you can get right to the work of doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show.
I was going to ask about the cost of living, but while we're on the topic of exploration and understanding those things, I think there's a way better parallel associated with a lot of the machine learning that's going on right now. And the idea that these models are generalizing so well. They're able, in the training, to balance this explore versus exploit equation very well, so we're getting better results than we ever have. Also better results in multimodal across all of everything. I'm interested in what your perspective is on the more recent advancements in some of these large language models. Like, what broader change do you think that's going to bring?
Well, I mean, big question, and there's no one right answer, but I've been doing some presentations at the company and then many people ask me, how do you define what's happening? How do you explain? My version of that is, I think last year we entered a new chapter in this third wave of AI that started pretty much 10 years ago. And it's a new chapter that I think presents a paradigm shift in multiple aspects, in the way we do machine learning, but also in the way we are going to be creating products and businesses. And I think it's pretty significant. I think there's definitely, we're at a before and after moment. And I love the analogy that you use, like exploration versus exploitation, and how these models somehow figured it out. And it's pretty impressive. I mean, the first time I interacted with the ChatGPT and some of the other large language models, these emergent capabilities that some of these models have, the ability to generalize and connect concepts, and some traits of what you can call reasoning, the ability to move between modalities, it's pretty incredible. And we talked about that a little bit, like the implications are pretty big. One of them is, the future of personalization or recommender systems as we know them I think there's going to be a very, very fundamental shift where so far, even though you have multiple ways to do recommender systems, whether it's collaborative filtering or content-based, the paradigm is similar, right? You have existing items and you have a population, and then you have usually a single way to recommend. Even though everyone gets something different, the mechanics of the recommendation are applied equally to everyone. And usually you have, clearly identified features that you feed into a model to, optimize for a relevant recommendation. And I think now with this new generation of models, they're going to shake the ground when it comes to recommender systems technology, because not only now you can query a system and get a synthesized answer on the fly. So instead of finding something, a piece of static information, it's generating a response on the fly, but it's shaping that response based not only on what you're trying to achieve, but based on who you are. So I think there's this, as part of these emergent behaviors, these models will also embed a layer of personalization that will make that synthesized content as relevant, as actionable, and as effective for who you are and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that to me, people talk about doomsday scenarios like, AI becoming sentient or any of those types of things. Surprisingly, what you're describing there with the recommender systems is probably the scariest thing to me, because so last night, my girlfriend's out of town, as you know, and I literally was up till 2:30 a.m. just watching stupid YouTube videos. When she's in town, she won't let me do that, and it's not an issue, but I went to bed super late, I didn't get a good night's sleep, and I had no self-control over, I just watched video after video. I found one of those channels that summarizes movies, and I did the equivalent of watching like 15 movies in 3 hours or whatever it was. And it's terrifying to me that someone who I believe to be fairly disciplined in myself could sit there and go against my best interest in that way. Especially today, I had important stuff to do. I had a podcast with my friend Jeff. I'm doing this with you. I'm making pizza tonight. It's one of the most important things in the world. And I was powerless to the technology, leveraging probably at least a little bit of what you're describing.
Yeah.
And man, that's what, it gets better. It affects people that are even, perhaps more weak-minded than myself. And I'm like, what does that mean?
I'm one of them.
Yeah,
I'm not a disciplined person.
Yeah, what does that mean more broadly? I think that's also maybe something that can be solved with AI or machine learning.
I don't know if you watch Black Mirror. I do. I think some of the episodes are incredibly written, but the new season, the first episode, I think it's called Everyone Hates Amy or something like that. And it's like, wow. And it's like incredible how, in the future you have this quantum computer that is generating new episodes in a Netflix-like platform based on the real life of someone who happens to be, could be anyone. You're a spectator. So, I don't know, anyway, you're going to watch it.
I will. I'm going to watch it on my plane ride tomorrow.
Yeah, I went down the rabbit hole.
It's Sunday, not
what
tomorrow.
You describe, a lot of people are like speculating with sentience, and first of all, I don't believe that's going to happen. But we have some real fundamental problems right in front of us, and this is, I totally agree, a big one, because even with current recommender systems technology, things are already scary in terms of the accuracy of recommendations and the mechanics for that enable a lot of addictive behavior with social media and just content consumption. We are moving already into a new chapter where not only recommendations are going to be on steroids, and I call it personalized personalization. It's like a new abstraction, but the content itself will be tailored and in many cases generated on the fly for you.
Yeah, and more immersive, more screens. I mean, I was thinking about this actually just now that, okay, so we had TVs, right? TVs in our house, we don't take it with us historically, you know, in like 80s, 90s, even 2000s. Then we have laptops and mobile phones. Dumb mobile phones, not on them all the time. Maybe you're going to talk to people, but it's more device to facilitate. Laptops a little bit more, but less entertainment inherently. Then we start moving into smartphones, always on us,
Yeah.
always looking at a screen. Then we have even smart watches, where we have two screens, where we're even more alerted to it because a watch is more accessible than our phone is in our pocket.
Yeah.
And then next, you know, it seems like if Apple is doing the VR augmented reality, it's going to go significantly more mainstream than Oculus. And now we are constantly, in theory, in a world in even 2-3 years, there will be people that 100% of the time, or like 95% of the time, have visual interface directly with technology. And, you know, knowing myself, that would not be good. I have to turn all my notifications off. I have to like turn the internet off when I do certain projects to be successful. And if I know that my attention, I'm going to be seeing pings or whatever it is all the time, that's going to be something that will be very, very concerning for me.
So one reflection on that, I think, yes, it's alarming, but I think it's also alarming not just because of the effectiveness of current technology to serve you, not what's good for you, but what's gonna be sticky so that you consume more and more. But the feedback loop, like you said, now we're permanently connected with a bunch of sensors, right? Let's not forget that the phone is a sensor, the Fitbit is a sensor, and we're gonna have more and more sensors. So that feedback loop that tells the system how
What's
your
working, what's not.
taste and your mood evolves, that's gonna be, that makes it exponentially alarming to some degree. But yeah, I think, and myself included, I no problem admitting, I do struggle with focus many times because I'm inherently, my brain is, I'm not a natural focused, disciplined person. My brain goes many places. I think that's part of the secret sauce, and
what makes it work.
For me, that's what worked for me. But I think we're all vulnerable to this new reality of constant stimulation and distraction. And I was reading a report somewhere recently that how many times we check email or how many times we lose focus.
Terrifying, yeah.
And I thought these days we were talking about, I don't know, maybe every half an hour, 40 minutes. And the statistic says that every minute we're losing focus, or like we're disconnecting from the context.
A little bit, yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, it's going to be very interesting to see who owns the attention in the future. That to me is a very fascinating question. And something we talked a little bit about offline is how companies are owning the models and other companies are outsourcing AI, data science to those models via API or whatever it might be. And the idea of multimodality, a lot of these things, it converges into, in some sense, there being singular APIs, which is crazy. Where you have, I used to have a model that would classify if this was a real or a fake plant. Write in the comments if you think it's real or fake, please.
Yeah.
And it would specifically focus on classifying that.
Yeah.
Now we can do this, and in a pretty short period of time, it'll be better than arguably any specific use case model.
Yeah.
We could send this to GPT-4 and ask, is this a real or a fake plant? And it would give pretty darn good results.
Yeah, totally. And that's what I was referring to as how these foundational models are also changing the way we do machine learning, or changing the way we've been doing machine learning for the past 10 years, especially, because up until now, and that's going to continue, it's not going to disappear, but let's say a classification problem in supervised learning, you have to collect the data, label data, which is already a challenge. You have to define your classes, and you have to build a model and train it and blah, blah, blah. Now with these models, especially as they become more and more multi-model or cross-model, you just submit a picture to the model, and you can also ask the model exactly what you want. What is the task that you want to perform? You could ask the model to count the number of subjects or classify what the image is about. I saw an example where someone asks, what is the irony in this image? And the model accurately explains what's ironic about that. And that is scary good. And I say scary good because that would be impossible to achieve using a supervised approach, or you would have to have millions of classes, which is impossible, technically impossible to actually deliver on something like that. So it's a pretty fundamental change. And I think when we talk about now, many companies are going to be using this. Their AI layer is not going to live in-house. It's going to be on OpenAI or Google. And I think it's the evolution of, the war for cloud service providers, right? And I think we talked about that as well last time, like thinking in terms of customer acquisition costs, like the big players, how they would, and still willing to give you almost $100,000 for you to build something on their technology stack. I think now there's going to be a new layer in town, which is the AI layer. And the business will be offering the best, most performant, cost-efficient, capable AI model. And guess what? Also, it happens to run on these technology stacks.
And to me, that's something that is exciting and beneficial in some ways, but also, again, pretty scary in some other ways. The beneficial thing is the barrier to entry for creating a company is so much lower because, wow, I have a good idea. I don't have to do all of the heavy lifting of building this model. I have to just define the use case, aggregate the data, differentiate market, and do the rest. The engineering side is not obsoleted, but it is significantly reduced. Whereas that used to be one of the biggest bottlenecks of how do I build this? How do I create that infrastructure? I have to have the specific knowledge, not just the idea and the execution. And but this now empowers a very small group of companies to have access or to be integrated with all of these other business and dramatically increase their individual wealth and opportunities. And it's almost super inefficient not to. So I was looking at, okay, how efficient would it be for me to either pay for individual API calls for a project I'm working on to OpenAI versus training, well, not even training, just downloading one of the Llama models on my computer or on a just simple cloud environment. And it's like, well, it's basically break even, or I calculate around break even for me to have the Llama model running on cloud and just responding to API calls, quote unquote, for free, as it would be. I mean, obviously there's break even based on volume, but based on the volumes I was projecting versus me just paying for the OpenAI GPT 3.5 API. And that's just going to get cheaper for the API. And so it's like, well, why wouldn't I use them? It's direct, it's easier, whatever it might be, versus maintaining my own environment.
And I think that's the gameplay. I mean, that's what the big players are after. I do think that more than ever, there are alternatives that are production ready that you can actually, open sources, companies like Hugging Face, like there's two things. The rate of commoditization of AI technology is like, more exponential than ever. But it does come with, you have like the two types of players, and I think those opposing forces to some degree are creating more access and more opportunity, because you have the big players that want to, with monopolistic moves to try to absorb as much of the market share, and you have these opposing forces on the open source side, and I think that over time, that's my view is that someone asked me that specific question. my personal view is that over time it's going to be a good thing. Like you're going to be able to pick and choose whatever you want, and yeah. But and also something that we haven't talked about yet, but data privacy and regulation is coming stronger than ever. I think what we've seen so far has been a case of ask for forgiveness, not for permission. So I think the regulation aspect will also hopefully make the playing field a little more even.
Interesting. I'm pretty skeptical of regulation of AI. I had Catherine Jarmel on a couple months ago, and she just wrote a book on data privacy. And in my opinion, the problem with data privacy is that regulators move so slow and they have such limited knowledge of AI and the direction it goes. How could they possibly regulate in an effective way? Hopefully they're getting a lot of help, and there's been a lot of effort into having really smart people focus on policy.
Yeah.
But and it also varies so much country to country, right? Or maybe continent to continent, especially with like Europe versus US versus Asia and how they view data privacy.
Yeah.
That to me is where I think everything comes to a head, is that.
And when I say regulation, just to make it clear, there's different layers of regulation. So I'm not talking about the big picture, like stopping AI development, a lot of the stuff that is in the conversation right now. But basic regulation and best practices at the intersection of ethical and legal.
So like internal self-regulation in some sense.
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well
and
as
I think
something like
that's going to bring a little more discipline, at least in how these models. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing I've observed and I'm kind of excited about or optimistic about more than I was before is the open source side, because I think the open source communities encourage transparency and they encourage conversations in a very different way than a lot of the companies that have the private models out there, right? If we don't know what the parameters are or what the weights are or any of these things, how can we critique it? How can we understand scale? How can we really have an educated data privacy or ethics discussion? Whereas if the models are open source, people can play with them. People can understand and get it to the nuts and bolts of what it means to regulate them a lot more effectively. And that's something, I think I was probably more like 50-50 earlier around should they be privatized or open sourced. And I'm moving more towards the open source side pretty predominantly.
Yeah. But I agree. I mean, it is an exciting time. It's been an exciting time for a while, but now it's like you said, I mean, now anyone can build a product that's powered by AI. And I think there's going to be a renewed focus on what really matters when it comes to putting a product in front of a user experience. So the layer that you're going to build on top of your business logic, which in turn can be, powered by AI. So what is the future of interfaces? What is the next generation of interfaces that leverage these technology building blocks? I think a big part of the differentiation is going to come from that layer.
It's funny you say that. A big reason I use ChatGPT over Bard or some of these other ones is I think that the UI UX for ChatGPT is so much better.
Very simple, yeah.
It's very simple, easy to use. Could be better if you could search your prompts better, but compared to Bard, it is far superior.
Yeah.
And I find that really interesting, is something like that can completely make or break a product in terms of, you look at the iPhone. The iPhone, or compared to, for example, Samsung Galaxy or some of these other ones that equal in compute, probably better in compute, better camera, better features, it is user experience that differentiates those things. And it will be a massive factor.
Yeah. And even without going super crazy with the UI, we already see a lot of work that consists in adding some simple layers of logic on top of this, chatbot-like interaction. Like you ask something, you get a response, and then you can easily, through hidden prompts or prompt engineering, have the system suggest what are the top three next questions I might be interested in asking, or what. So the idea of adding some layer of business logic that can be totally deterministic, or could also be leveraging the model to make the experience more actionable and more engaging. I think it's gonna have to do with that a lot more, yeah.
Amazing.
Versus having the most powerful model.
So, shifting gears, focusing on a little bit more on AI products. You recently released a really cool product at Splice in the audio medium. And I was wondering if you could, one, tell me what it is, and two, talk a little bit about that experience of bringing an idea, something, like your kind of brainchild here, into the world, and how it was received.
Wow. Cool. So yes, we just released a new feature called Create. Is on the web on Splice, and it uses the same core technology that we built a couple of years, and I think we talked about CoSo, which stands for compatible sounds. And actually, the first product that we released is this mobile app called CoSo. So now this is a web-based sort of version of the same thing, but with some enhancements. And it's a next generation idea generator for making music. So it doesn't make music for you, but it allows you to come up with new original ideas that can inspire you to create, a full song or something. And it's currently available, and we're gonna have more coming up that uses the same core technology. But the journey to get here has been super interesting, very fulfilling, and also very challenging, right? Because building an AI first or AI based product takes a lot more than just integrating AI technology. That's my opinion. I think when you move from solving problems from a deterministic to a probabilistic approach, that comes with trade-offs, right? Because you don't have full predictability in terms of the behaviors of the system. So the product, and even all the way to the UX that you need to build on top, needs to be compatible with a probabilistic paradigm. And to make that more clear, for instance, 2 years ago, we released this feature called similar sounds. So we built some proprietary machine learning models, a type of autoencoder, to be able to transform our audio data into these very compressed, high quality embeddings. And then we would do similarity search in the embedding space, and that would recommend sounds that are similar. This time around, we follow a similar approach, actually very similar to that, but we figure out how to represent audio in a dimensional space where distances now reflect the degree to which two sounds are compatible, that they sound good together. So fundamentally, the technologies are the same. We're doing similarity search in a latent space. But I give you an example on how, one of the current challenges already that we're seeing. This technology is completely unsupervised, which means it only relies on the audio content itself, and it can identify in milliseconds the most compatible sounds amongst millions and millions. Traditionally, when this idea of compatibility in music or sound is driven by the rules of music theory, and especially the concept of key, or like the tonal center, is something very prevalent that people are very attached to. So we've been getting a lot of feedback about, in the best case scenario, they want to know which key their creation is in, but guess what? This doesn't work like that. So already presents a cognitive challenge of thinking about this differently.
Yeah.
But in the worst case scenario, some people are completely skeptical and think that all we're doing is just matching by metadata and that it is not AI and stuff. So from a product design perspective, that's already pretty challenging. And I like to say, when you build, in the case of Splice at least, it makes it even more challenging, because it's very easy to deploy AI in a way that it replaces the human. It's easy to do the push button, here's an output approach, like the Mid Journey or the. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but for a company like Splice that is all about putting the creator at the center, you need to be very intentional in how you design your AI technology and how you design the interface that encapsulates it to keep the human at the center. In this case, for instance, you manifest, going back to the idea of multimodality, you get to manifest your intent in some modality. In this case, with this first release, is in the form of a style or a genre. And that gives you a starting point. But then we give you a mechanic that allows you to iterate from that starting point and make it eventually whatever you want. And I can show you later how that works. But yeah, fundamentally, I think, at least for, the work that I've been doing, it's not about the AI technology, it's the interplay between the technology, the content in this case, and the UX. And you need to work at the intersection of the three to deliver something that's usable and that keeps the human at the center.
So who is the main consumer of a product like this? That's something I always find really interesting, is that AI can serve so many different types of people depending on the nature of the data even.
Yeah. Currently, this product is targeted to our current audience, music producers. The good news is that it can appeal and it can provide value to the full spectrum, the people who are getting started all the way to Grammy-winning producers, which, by the way, we are already, testing that with professional people, and they are blown away by the capability. So it's really something that can benefit, everyone, because it solves a very fundamental problem. What makes two sounds sound good together?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to think about what you have learned about what makes two sounds sound good together, as a musician yourself, but also as a data scientist. Do those things conflict?
They can, but that's precisely, and I talked about this in one interview recently, and I said literally, we can all agree that something sounding good doesn't necessarily sound interesting, and that's where you can draw the line between something that's objectively or mathematically, compatible, which could be driven by some idea of consonance, that there are ways to quantify that. But then eventually, in the case of music, everything is subjective at the end of the day. And guess what? There's many times what brings that magic into a piece of music is that happy accident, that thing that was not supposed to be there, that thing that is actually not compatible, and even it can even clash with some other elements. So, but precisely that's why I talk about, when you're building a product for a human creator, and especially if it's a product that is meant to help you manifest your art, you need to figure out how to keep the human in the loop. And the way to do that, in my opinion, is you need to figure out how to enable these mechanics that allow you to be in control. And that is hard when you're building with AI.
Yeah, very hard. I love that concept so much. I do want to hone in on something you mentioned earlier. So you're talking about how you're doing similarity search based on embeddings. It sounds like they're in some form of vector database, which sounds very similar to how you store a lot of data in some of these large language models.
Yeah.
The parallels are phenomenal. But you've been working with vector databases and doing embeddings, I think you told me, since 2014. Why is it that this is so relevant to all these new large language models now? Why is this coming back into vogue?
Yeah. It's funny how some things are, you have these cycles where things, people lose interest in some area and then things become hot again. I literally have a slide from a recent presentation that says vector databases are hot again. And that's the case. Yeah, the interesting thing is, I mean, a lot of people are coming across this for the first time, and that's fine, and think that, oh, vector databases are a new thing, and these embeddings are a new thing.
VCs certainly think they're a new thing.
Okay, certainly they're not. And I remember my first steps into, working with audio when I first came to the States. I was working on a solution to automatically identify the headphones that you were wearing, the brand and the model. And the way I figured out how to do that was by measuring the impedance of the headphone device and using that impedance information to create basically an embedding, even though it was not learned by an ML model, a vector representation of the impedance pattern of that headphone. So impedance is something that you can measure from a headphone, and it depends on the construction and the physics and the circuitry and all that. And usually each headphone has a unique fingerprint or a unique pattern of impedance. And that was kind of like probably the first problem that I had to solve that involved this idea of computing distances in the vector space. And I don't think I used a vector database at the time because the number of candidates was small enough to be able to do brute force search. But the mechanics were there. Is the idea that you can represent your data in a space where then you can simply compute distances and find something relevant or an exact match or something similar, and allows you to solve the problem, right? And it's funny that now with LLMs, suddenly this is, for a lot of people, this is an incredibly, a new thing and something sophisticated that wasn't done before. But this is nearest neighbor search. The name of it, well, KNN. But yeah, KNN, we've been doing that for a long time, right?
Yeah, quite a long time.
Yeah.
At least 2 years.
But yeah, and I find it very satisfying because I've been working with embeddings and vector databases for a long time. So I feel very,
Vindicated.
no, and it makes me want to build something because I have developed a lot of intuition over the years on, how to massage your data representations to make them indexable and how to, do similarity search at scale and all that. But I think what we see today is that there's almost like a new technology stack that is based on one large language models, proprietary data, and a vector database. And the reason why that is becoming so popular is because the opportunity for businesses to integrate proprietary data with the power of a large language model is incredibly big, right? And I think this embedding vector database approach is very compelling because it allows you to use an off-the-shelf model. You don't need to fine-tune the model or retrain the model. You can simply, the right model, you can simply take your proprietary data, slice it up in little chunks, compute embeddings using that same large language model. And then when you want to ask something about your data, that query is converted into the embedding space, and then you're simply doing nearest neighbor search between the question and the target corpus of proprietary data. So it's a very simple, actually, and elegant solution, and one of the things
way cheaper,
very, very performant.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's pretty soon every company is going to have a solution that with a vector database.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to see one, our listeners, you're going to see one in a couple months here when I finish the project I'm working on. So I think that really does change the paradigm. We were talking about it a little bit before of the data science, machine learning, ML engineering domain, because I'm not saying you're not going to be training models anymore, but a lot of the models that are going to be used are going to be trained by someone else, and we're going to be integrating our data with it, not via a training step, but via an interface or via prompt type interface rather than like a pure absorption of the data that's being used. And I find that to be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
There's obviously things that are missed or overlooked when you don't train directly on the data, but it does work really well,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
No, and we were talking about this also another version of the paradigm shift in terms of systems. How, and I totally agree. I mean, there's going to be changes in skill set, or what are the specific skills within the data science, data engineering, machine learning engineering domain that are going to become more or less relevant or valuable with this new generation of models. But we were talking about how, for the past 10 years, companies build their, technology stack and products in a way where you have, I don't know, traditional data stores, relational databases, or even, other types of databases. The business logic is built on top of that. The interfaces are built on top of that. And over the years, they had to add the AI layer on top of that stack, right? And I'm, in my cases, I can relate to that. When I joined Splice, I came to operate at the top of that stack, coming up with AI layers that can serve content more effectively, but the technology stack was there and it hasn't changed. And I think we're going to move incrementally, we're going to move to a new reality where that AI layer goes all the way to the bottom. It becomes the foundation. And on top of that AI layer, you're going to build your business logic, your interfaces, and that's how, I think things are going to evolve.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, that foundation layer, your company doesn't even necessarily have to own. It could be GPT-4, it could be GPT 3.5.
Yeah.
And I actually would push back. I don't think it'll happen incrementally. I think it'll happen very rapidly because the barrier to entry to do that is so low comparatively, to how we used to do it.
Yeah.
It would essentially be like, oh, we have to build all of the data structure, all the infrastructure. We have to train these models. We have to keep them updated. We have to retrain. We have to do all of this. Now you essentially just create an interface or an API.
Yeah.
You probably have to clean up your data and your infrastructure and tailor it a little bit, but it is a single API rather than a integrated infrastructure, which is so complicated and difficult. So
no, and I agree. But the reason why I see it as a transition is, so for a new company or like an early stage startup, I totally agree. Build it with that new paradigm. But I think for a lot of existing companies of a certain scale, migrating into that could be really painful and costly. So that's where I see more like, there's going to be a long period of time that I think, at least at the enterprise level, could easily take another 5-10 years for some companies, because some companies have been building their entire business and on top of these legacy systems. Yeah.
So I think that's where the friction is the unlearning and undoing rather than the adoption.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's what I'm trying to get at is adoption is actually really easy.
Oh yeah.
It's like, if you didn't have that team of 150 people that are maintaining that infrastructure and doing all that stuff, you could literally just slip this in comparatively.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And that to me is what is so transformative about it, is like, well, if companies, like in theory, a lot of these big companies, they could make that switch relatively quickly.
Yeah.
It would just be so inefficient because of all the other infrastructure that they've built. Like, they're maintaining these systems, there's migrations, there's whatever it might be. And it's kind of the opposite for people who would adopt data science in the legacy or the traditional way, is the overhead of building those systems is so great. That's like what the barrier to entry is, right? Which is kind of crazy, where the barrier for one person is just, for one group is just like starting and building the infrastructure, and the other one is, oh, we built this infrastructure, and now we have to get rid of it.
No, and I think we're going to see some hybrids. I mean, there's going to be business cases where you want to have the best of both worlds. It's something that I'm really excited about. It makes me want to build something if I have the time. mostly of of what we see today is like text, right? You index documents and you query documents, but in that embedding space, you can, going back to the idea of multimodality or cross modality, we're gonna start seeing systems that can seamlessly move between and query all types of data that can be even indexed in the same embedding space. That to me is really interesting.
Yeah.
So if I can query something, if I can query using text and be matched against sound or images or online courses directly or anything, that's gonna be really, really interesting. And in a way, it's kind of like, I think the move that also OpenAI is trying to do with the plugins program. But I see that they come in, and that's gonna be really, really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's a lot of optimism around that. I think actually is a pretty good point to end, I think, because we talked about all the dangers and the scary stuff before, but the multimodal stuff I think is so, I mean, obviously there's dangers and implications of that, but it's so promising in terms of what you can build, what you can create, how you can integrate a lot of these things. Ollie, I love talking to you. This is so much fun.
Likewise.
I'm so grateful for your presence all the time. How can people learn more about you? And do you have any final words of wisdom for people listening?
Final words of wisdom. I think it's a great time to build stuff more than ever. Like you said, the barrier to entry is lower than ever. So the good news is that you can build and prototype something relatively quickly. The bad news it's not bad news. It's things are getting commoditized so fast that it happened to me for a few months now. You have this brilliant idea that you think you came up with, and I used to be relatively good at predicting when something would happen, and I've been failing miserably over the past year. Like, I would say, this is probably going to take 6 months, and it would take a week, right? So I don't know. I don't know if that's some wisdom, but it's a good time to build. But I think, yes, as usual, speed matters a lot. So
build and build fast. I love it.
Yeah, and we talked about that. Yeah.
Amazing. And people can reach you on LinkedIn, correct? That's the best way. Okay.
Doors always open.
Thank you so
My
much
friend,
again.
a pleasure.
Let's go eat some pizza.
Let's make some pizza.